Hey, hi, how are you? Welcome or welcome back, whichever applies to you. I have finally successfully forced myself to sit down and talk about all the books that I read in October. I've been putting this off for the longest time because I read 14 books in October, 14, which is I think the most I've ever read in a month. And I talk a lot in depth about the books that I liked and that I read, and I liked and read a lot of books in October. So I am dreading the pain and suffering that my voice will go through. But I'm gonna try to keep this short. Hopefully I succeed. Let's just get into it. Oh, my hairs really do be sticking straight up. I'm gonna try to loosely sort the books I read into genre categories just so I don't have to jump back and forth too much. So let's start with YA. I read a lot of YA in October, mostly because I wanted quick and easy and fun things to read because, I mean, maybe this is like too much information, but I was in the hospital for the first week of October. Not for the entire week, just for a day or so. Yeah, so I was not in the best of moods in the beginning of the month, so for the rest of the month I wanted something lighthearted to read. So that's why I read a lot of YA. It's not my typical go-to genre to read, but it is what it is. So the first YA novel that I read or listened to is Cinder by Marissa Meyer, and Cinder is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles series. Cinder is, if you couldn't kind of guess by the name, is a retelling of Cinderella, but it's a retelling set in like a sci-fi, like cyborg, robot, human sort of world, and I thought it was really good. It was a lot better than what I expected because I typically don't like fantasy YA. It's a little too... I don't know what it is I don't like about it, but I don't tend to like it. In this case, yeah, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I didn't hate Cinder, the main character. I actually respected her and liked her a fair amount. Prince Kai, who is like the Prince Charming, he is so cute. He's so endearing and he's very wholesome, and yeah, I liked him a lot. Very lovable characters. Like, super quick plot summary of Cinder. So we have Cinder, she's a cyborg and she works as a mechanic. There's all like the typical Cinderella tropes or relationships, I guess. So you have the evil stepmother, right? She's just as evil and unlikable in this book and series as she is in the movie. No redeeming qualities whatsoever, so I guess you could say that's a con about the book. But anyways, so we have the stepmother, we have the prince, we have like the big event, which is a ball, right? That's the pivotal event. But aside from that, I think that's all the similarities to Cinderella. Oh, and she has two stepsisters, but she's not actually on bad terms with at least both of them. She's on bad terms with one of them, but she really likes the other one. So those are all the main similarities to Cinderella. Cinder works as a mechanic, like I said, and that's actually how she meets Kai, because Prince Kai goes to her stall in like a merchant area and he's like, hey, can you repair this robot for me? And I think he was disguised as a commoner, because why else would a prince ask a random mechanic to fix his robot? She's supposedly the best mechanic in the entire city, so that's a reason why he sneaks out to go see her. And, you know, from there they kind of like each other, but he's obviously a prince and she's a mechanic and she's a cyborg, and cyborgs in this society are like second-class citizens. They're not treated very well. A lot of people don't like them because they are considered like not human because of their robotic parts. So yeah, then there's also this empire on the moon ruled by this queen who is extremely evil, also no redeeming qualities, and she really wants to marry Prince Kai to take over the world. That's the driving plot of the story and of the series, pretty much. Like I said, I really like this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The only kind of critiques I have for it are, one, the villains are super two-dimensional, no redeeming qualities, or like caricatures of normal humans. And the second thing is, I feel like the societal structure, or like, you know, like I mentioned that cyborgs are considered second-class citizens, so I feel like there's room for some commentary there about like prejudice and bias against people who the mass majority consider to be different from the rest of them. Yeah, I think there was room for commentary there, but it was like super black and white, you know, it was like kind of along the lines of the villain thing. It was Yeah, super black and white societal structure. I don't know if that's going to be developed in later books in the series. Maybe. I feel like it might, but yeah, those are the only two issues, I guess you could say, I had with this book. The second YA that I read back in October was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I read this as an ebook, and this is, I think, the third Elizabeth Acevedo novel that I've read. I think it's also her most recent one, and I'm officially a fan of Elizabeth Acevedo. I'm in her fan club. If there's like a fan group out there, please let me know so I can sign up and join them and rave about Elizabeth Acevedo every single day for the rest of my life. I loved it. Elizabeth Acevedo, she's so good at writing punchy prose. A lot of her novels, except for With the Fire on High, I think that one was written in like normal novel words. The Poet X and Clap When You Land were written in verse, and she does it so well. She does it so well. The prose is, what did I say? It's short, it's punchy, but it's also at times eloquent enough to make you really reread sentences and be like, wow, that was a beautiful line that you wrote and created, Miss Acevedo. And then there's also parts where it's vulnerable and you feel so sympathetic towards the characters, and then you're like, yes, this is how I felt when I was a child. You put the emotions that I felt into words. And I think that's, whenever authors can do that, it's just so amazing to me. Clap When You Land is about two young girls who, one lives in the Dominican Republic and the other one lives in New York. They both share the same father, but they don't know that. So one day when their father dies in a very tragic plane crash. That's actually a real event. I remember reading in the author's note that there was a plane crash. The dad in the story was flying to the Dominican Republic, and similarly in real life, I think there was a plane going to the DR and it crashed, and because it happened around the time of 9/11, it didn't make a big splash in the news, but obviously affected a lot of people, and so I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Acevedo based this story on that real life event. So anyways, yeah, the plane crashes, their father dies, and his death is kind of the reason why these two girls learn about each other and eventually maybe try to meet each other or get to know each other. A lot of times with YA, like the teenage angst is a little too dramatic for me, but in this case, Acevedo does so well with it. She makes you feel for the characters without pushing their teenage angst onto you and making that feel a little natural and uncomfortable. I also wrote in my notes, I wish her books were around when I was a teenager, because I feel like my teenage self would be like, oh my god, this author understands the angsty emotions that I have. I gave this book a 4 out of 5, would recommend. Can't wait for her next book. Then I read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and this is the first book in the Mistborn series. I'm not sure if it's a trilogy. I almost said trilogy, but I don't know if that's the case. This, unfortunately, was my first disappointment of the month. I have read one Brandon Sanderson before, and it was The Way of Kings, and it was okay. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the plot, but Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion, okay, it's just my opinion, he can't write dialogue. And I think The Final Empire is one of the first books that he wrote, so it's pretty early on in his writing career, and my god, the dialogue is so cringy. I had to skip so many parts, and there's a lot of sections where I was like, real people don't talk like this, Mr. Sanderson. That was a huge drawback for me about this book, and I am really picky with dialogue in novels, so when I read those sections, I was like, not my thing. I keep talking about what I like and didn't like about the book before telling you what the book is actually about, so let me do that real quick. So in this fantasy world, we have people who can use magic, and their magic powers come from burning metals. So they would like consume pure metals, and they would burn the metals inside them. Most people who have the ability to do this can only burn one type of metal, and it gives them like a specific set of powers or enhancements. A very small group of people can burn all of the metals. And those people are called Mistborn. In this book, we have two main characters. We have a guy named Kel, and he's a Mistborn, and he's kind of like a Robin Hood type of character. He, pretends, steals from the rich, gives back to the poor, that kind of a deal. In this case, a lot of the poor people in society are called Ska, and they are people without any ability to burn metals. And our second main character's name is Vin, and she's a young orphan girl, and she's working in like this thieves guild. And she eventually meets Kel, and their paths cross, and shit goes down. Brandon Sanderson is always good at writing a strong magical system, a strong, I think, political system as well. But yeah, the dialogue really did not work for me in this book. Pros of this book, things I liked, amazing world building, unique magic system, and the action and fight scenes are always super cool. It's like Brandon Sanderson like literally visualizes every second of the fight because he describes everything in such clear detail that it's like really easy to recreate the battle scenes, the fight scenes, the action scenes in your head. He's really good at doing that. Cons, obviously the dialogue, already talked about that. Also, I think the characters are really two-dimensional. It's not always the case. I think in The Way of Kings, his characters are okay. But here in The Final Empire, I just feel like all the characters had very unique motives, but they still felt really flat, and I don't know why. And the last thing I didn't like about this book was the random romance that came out of nowhere. I have nothing against romances. I love a good romance, but the romance in this book, I was like, first, I don't really ship the characters together, and it was just way too sudden. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna spoil anything else if you do want to read this book. I gave The Final Empire a 2.5 out of 5. Then I read one of my favorite books of the month, and it was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. Oh my gosh, guys. This book is so good. It's set in the 1950s in San Francisco, California, and it's about a 17-year-old girl named Lily, and she's Chinese American, and she's in high school. One day, Lily comes across this flyer, and it's a flyer for the Telegraph Club, which is a lesbian club super close to where she lives in Chinatown. And it features a woman dressed as a man. So that's the show that the club is highlighting. Lily is super curious about the club and the show, but she's also kind of ashamed that she's curious and wants to go because all her life she's been told that those clubs are not meant for good Chinese girls, And then one day she meets a girl called Kathleen Miller at school, and Kathleen is like, hey, I've been to the club, I've seen the show, do you want to go sometime? And then from there we get a cute romance and an amazing novel. I think from that description you might be like, oh, it's just like a YA romance, coming of age, queer love story. It's so much more than that. I had so many thoughts after I read this book that I had to write it all down, so let me read you some of the things that I found so interesting and amazing that this book tried to do, okay? So one, the hidden, but yet also renowned to the people who are looking for it, SF queer community. That's one thing that this book brings to light, which is not really discussed in a lot of novels. Number two, the difficulties of living as a queer individual in the 1950s and how difficult it was to accept, to accept yourself as someone who identifies as queer, and also to get acceptance from people outside, people like your family, like your friends. That's something the book discusses. Number three, the suffocatingly reserved behaviors of Chinese culture and how that clashed with, in this case, Lily's exploration of her own self-identity. Number four, the silent yet so important role of women in science in the form of female computers at JPL, because one of Lily's aunts works as a female computer at JPL. And the last thing I identified, number five, the daily subtle impacts of the Red Scare on Chinese communities, of course, because this is set in the 1950s. As you can see, Malinda Lo tries to tackle so many different issues in this novel, and she does, in my opinion, such a great job. And it's by no means a perfect novel. I mean, there's a lot of plot points that get brought up and then are never spoken about again, but my God, I just think that, yeah, I was still so impressed with this book. I've personally never read a book about Chinese communities in the 1950s, and I know there's a couple of books floating around out there that discuss that, But this was my first, and oh my gosh, I thought it was so good. It was so upsetting to read about how individuals in the Chinese community during this time had to constantly live in fear of deportation even if they were citizens, and how their national identity kind of toes the line constantly between model citizen and like national communist threat. In the story, Lily's father, who is a US citizen, his citizenship papers are taken away because he refuses to kind of put one of his patients who's a suspected communist threat. Her dad refused to throw that guy under the bus because they don't know for sure if that person's actually a threat and involved in those activities. And the FBI takes Lily's dad's papers away because he didn't give them the answer that they wanted to hear. And obviously with that, deportation looms over Lily's family's head. And also, you know, you see similar things happening to Lily's best friend Shirley's family. And oh my gosh, it's just so good. I can't stop saying that it's so good because it is so good. Along with these more serious, difficult topics, you also have like the mundane daily life of a 17-year-old who has to go to school and do her homework. So I just thought it was a really good balance of like serious topics, serious discussions. You see how these very difficult experiences affect a teenager's life, but then you also see the sort of mundane, everyday experiences, the coming of age part of the novel, right? The romance that's happening as a background plot in this book. Even like the friendships that are mentioned, the friendship between Lily and her best friend Shirley, and how it's a very toxic and difficult relationship because of their upbringing and the community that they were in. I need to stop talking about this because I can go on forever. Obviously, it's a 5 out of 5 for me. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Another YA novel that I read was Angel and Hannah, a novel in verse by Ishle Park. I think that's how you say her name. As you can tell from the title, this is a novel written in verse, and it was really short. I listened to it as an audiobook and it was only, I think, like 2 hours long, so super, super quick read. I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5. This book is about two kids. I forget how old they are in the book when it started, but the girl's name is Hannah and the boy's name is Angel. Hannah is a Korean-American girl from Queens, New York, and Angel is a Puerto Rican boy from Brooklyn, and they fall in love in the spring of 1993. That's pretty much all this book is about. It's a coming-of-age story about Angel and Hannah's romance. And it's, I think, a very bittersweet novel because it portrays growing up, you know, two people growing up together, falling in love, and then growing apart. But it wasn't super impactful to me. Maybe because of how short it was, but yeah, I don't know. It just felt average to me. In October, I also read Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, and I was kind of surprised to see this book categorized as YA. To me, this felt like a more adult novel, maybe because the characters are like in their early 20s and I associate YA with characters in their teens. So yeah, I was a little surprised to see that. Yolk is about two sisters, June and Jane, I think. Pretty sure that's what it is. We follow Jane's perspective throughout this book. Jane is 20-something-year-old. She's in her early 20s and she's still in college in New York. And June, her older sister, is also in New York, but she works as she works in finance. I forget exactly what she does. The sisters' relationship isn't the best. It hasn't always been the best. But Jane one day finds out that June has cancer. And so the rest of the book is her, honestly both of them, coming to terms with that. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I did like it. I thought these sisters' relationship was really well done. You can totally see like the love-hate that's there. I will say though, at some points in the book, I felt like Jane and June's back and forth, it's meant to be very biting and sharp and like angsty because they're both at very difficult points in their life, right? June is struggling to come to terms with the fact that she has cancer and might die, and Jane is at a pivotal, I guess, point in her life, so they're both struggling. I don't know, there's something about their relationship that bothers me a little bit and I can't pinpoint exactly what it is. I think it's definitely a me thing. It's not you, it's not the book, it's me in this case. Don't really know how to explain this. I feel like the sisters' relationship was too sharp. I feel like there was a lack of compassion from both ends, and because they're both unwilling to be compassionate and empathetic towards each other, they're both honestly just assholes towards each other. And I understand that they grew up with this very complex relationship. Their family and culture contributed to the difficulties in them getting along. But man, I don't know. I feel like they're just both such dicks to each other at different points throughout the book. And it's totally this kind of tough love situation that I guess wouldn't be acceptable to me personally in my personal relationships. But yeah, totally a personal issue. I don't think this is an issue with the book. A lot of people enjoy this novel and the sisters' relationships. So yeah. Okay, and then the last sort of YA, I think this is technically middle grade, but I'll include it in a YA novel that I read, is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a super cute, super sweet novel about a witch who every year rescues babies from being eaten by wild animals, essentially, because there's this nearby town that every year sacrifices a child to the witch. Because they think that these yearly sacrifices will prevent the witch from coming and killing them all, or cursing them all. Actually, the witch is the one being like, why are these people putting children in the woods every year? I'm gonna like take these kids, and she feeds them starlight, which makes them very special children, and she adopts them out to other families who are looking for kids. One year, the witch accidentally feeds a child moonlight, and that gives the child magical powers, so the witch is like, well, it's my responsibility. I gotta take you in and teach you how to use your magic. This book, like I said, is super cute. It's a very comfy and sweet novel. My only kind of criticism was that the climax of the novel was a little bit weaker than the build-up. The build-up was great. The build-up was excellent, but the climax and resolution came a little too quickly and too like easily almost. But I don't know. I tried to be aware of the fact that this is a middle grade. It's not meant for my age range. So I think for the audience that it's intended for, this is a great novel full of hope, full of important topics and themes like family and love, and specifically motherly love. And yeah, I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's very cozy, so if you're looking for a quick, comfortable read this winter, I would recommend that one. Alright, so that wraps up all the YA novels that I read. Let's dive into literary / historical fiction. I'll just combine those two genres into one. The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Shafak. I love Elif Shafak. She's one of my favorite authors of all time. I'm slowly working through her backlist, and The Architect's Apprentice was so good. We follow a young boy named Jahan, and he's sent to the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, the palace specifically, with an elephant to be an elephant handler for the Sultan. I think he's really young when he gets sent to do this. He's like 12 or 14 at the beginning of the novel, but the entire book is just following his experiences, learning how to be an elephant tamer. He eventually meets the chief architect for the Sultan, and the architect kind of takes him under his wing and teaches him how to be an architect, and that's why the book is called The Architect's Apprentice. If you don't like slow atmospheric novels where nothing really happens, I would not recommend this book for you, because there is pretty much no plot. It's very much a character-driven novel. You follow Jahan, you follow a couple of other characters as well, and you see how they grow as people and how they sometimes become corrupt, sometimes end up in different places from where they started. I know it's really big, but I don't want to spoil anything. And yeah, if that doesn't sound interesting to you, avoid this book at all costs, because yeah, nothing happens. For me though, I really like those types of books, so yeah, this book was right up my alley. The writing was beautiful, the prose was so nice, and some very broad topics covered in this novel. We have art and religion, architecture as an art, wealth and balance, which is really interesting. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. There's this idea that Elif Shafak writes about in this book that's pretty much the trade-off, I guess, of wealth and power and fame and like physical manifestations of that. I don't know if that makes any sense. For example, there's a lot of cases where a sultan or like a very high up advisor to the sultan would want to manifest their power in the nation by requesting the chief architect to design them this powerful, amazing, grand structure. And shortly after these structures get built, and it's grand, it's beautiful, it's massive, a testament to the money and wealth that was put into that project. But after these grand structures are unveiled, there's always these downfalls that occur to the people who requested the initial construction of the building. I just thought that was such an interesting concept to explore in this, and there's actually a quote that I wrote down that kind of encompasses this. I'm gonna try my best to read it out to you, but I'm not the best read out louder. I'm not the best at reading out loud, so bear with me, okay? Oddly, as the mosque built in his name rose higher and higher, the Sultan descended lower and lower. The two of them, the man and the building, were inextricably linked in a profound yet inverted way, like night and day. With every nail hammered, with each stone added to the edifice, something was taken away. Health, happiness, power, and ultimately kismet. So that was describing one instance where that occurs, but it happens a lot throughout the book, and it was so interesting to see. Anyways, I'm gonna stop talking about that book right there because I could go on forever. And obviously I gave it a 5 out of 5. It's one of my new favorite books of all time as well. A lot of bangers this month, a lot of bangers. Okay, then I read Swimming Back to Trout River by Linda Ray Feng. This is a book about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Sorry, I had to read the synopsis real quick to remind myself what it was called. So we mainly follow one family. We follow the father, his name is Momo. We follow the mother, her name is Kasha, and we follow briefly their daughter Junie. We start off with Momo and Kasha living in China, them being young adults attending college and things like that. And then we follow them throughout the Cultural Revolution, how their lives change as a result of it. And eventually Momo immigrates to the United States. I think he goes to study his PhD there. And that separation from his wife Kasha causes a lot of developments to occur in both of their lives. Their daughter Junie is a girl born without lower limbs. So as Momo is studying in the States, Junie is living with her grandparents in kind of like the countryside of China. So it's mostly about this family. It's also about music because Momo, when he was younger, wanted to be a violinist. And unfortunately, with the Cultural Revolution, you couldn't play music that wasn't approved by the government, and I don't think you could play instruments, like foreign instruments as well. So he had to kind of give up on that dream, but you know, that element of music, the musicality in the prose and actual discussion of music is relevant, very relevant throughout the entire book, which I appreciated. I studied music for a while when I was young, and I don't know, I've always been interested in seeing how authors can write about, especially classical music, because, you know, the best way to appreciate classical music is to listen to it, right? So yeah, it's always interesting to me to see how authors tackle that with words. The book is called Swimming Back to Trout River, so there's a lot of references to water in the book, kind of fluidity and movement and ceaselessness, those kinds of themes or topics. So yeah, also not too plot driven. I will say though it's more plot driven than The Architect's Apprentice, but it's definitely still very, very much character focused. So if you like books like that, I would recommend this. And it's a very quiet, almost melancholic novel, I guess. And overall I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I also read Such a Fun Age by Kiley, Reid, and this book was, or has been, super popular. And I'm sure you know what it's about at this point, but if you don't, it's about a young black babysitter, her well-intentioned, I guess, white employer, the mom of the child she's babysitting for, and also her white boyfriend. What's his name? I can't find his name right now and I don't remember it, but he's also kind of a big deal in this book. The scene that the book starts off with is Amira, who's the main character, the babysitter, is at like a local convenience store or something with the kid that she's babysitting. Her name is Briar, and Amira is, like I mentioned, black and Amira is white. So a security guard comes over and he's like, hey, is that your kid? And there's this whole situation. And that's how the book starts, and that's the catalyst for a lot of events that happen later. The book touches on things like performative activism, on the nuances of race and privilege, important topics that everyone should read and learn about. So I overall enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Overall good. The hype is well deserved, and if you haven't picked it up, you totally should. Okay, next in the fantasy sci-fi category, we have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is another one of those authors where I will read everything he has ever written, and I'm in the process of doing that. I know Neil Gaiman is like hit or miss with a lot of people. His writing style is very distinct and unique. Some people love it, some people hate it. I definitely fall into the camp of people who love it and adore it with my entire heart. And I also really like Neil Gaiman's voice, so I listened to The Ocean at the End of the Lane as an audiobook, and that also really encouraged me to listen to The Graveyard Book as an audiobook, which I just recently finished. I'll talk about that next month. But Ocean at the End of the Lane is about a dude who goes back to his childhood home area for a funeral, and there's like a lull between the funeral and like the reception or something, and so he finds himself driving back to his childhood home. And then from there, he also wanders into his neighbor's home. And as he's wandering through the street and their yard, he suddenly recalls all these events that happened when he was 7, and the role that his neighbor, Letty Hempstock, yeah, he remembers like all the adventures that he went on with her and how Letty and her family saved him from a lot of the monsters that tormented him when he was young. At first listen, this book I think sounds very much like a YA novel, like a coming of age story, but I thought it was really interesting, and I forget where I read this, but Neil Gaiman actually didn't intend for this book to be a YA novel, so that's why he made the first part of the book, the first couple of chapters, really boring, so as to turn younger readers away from the book, because this book is about helplessness. The helplessness you feel as a child, the utter lack of power and despair that you feel when you have no control over what you do, what you say, how to live your life. And I guess Neil Gaiman just didn't want kids to read and experience that. But I thought Neil Gaiman did so well writing those emotions. In those scenes where the narrator's a child, oh my gosh, like I felt as a reader similarly so powerless and like so small and insignificant in the face of, in this case, they're like literal monsters, I guess, but also the narrator's parents can also be seen as kind of monsters that trap him, right? Neil Gaiman novels always leave me with like this sense of wonder and appreciation for the world that we live in, despite how mundane every single day is. His novels always kind of remind me that there's quiet beauty and magic you can find in the world if you open your heart and your mind to it. And I just think that's it's such a precious feeling. And that's why Neil Gaiman novels mean a lot to me, and that's why I'll continue reading them. I still have so many to go through, which I'm really glad about. Anyways, Ocean at the End of the Lane, 4 out of 5 stars from me. Next, I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, and this I think is technically sci-fi, but this is a novella about a world where robots have become sentient and have departed from human civilization, and so the world is like separated into the wilderness, which the robots largely inhabit, and human towns and cities, which humans kind of just chill in. And in human society, I think people have largely given up on automation as a technology because robots became sentient, and the people still don't know how that happened. So they're like, okay, we're gonna stay away from that. But anyways, we follow a tea monk named Dex, and they go around different towns and they serve tea to people and listen to people's problems and soothe them in any way that they can, sort of a situation. One day, sibling Dex is like, I am so tired of what I've been doing of this civilization. I want to go out and explore. So they take their cart, their kind of tea travel cart, and go off into the wild where people don't really go because it's dangerous, because it's wild, because no one really knows what's in there. Sibling Dex and Mosscap, a robot. They talk about life and the purpose of life and all these existential and abstract questions that we ask ourselves in the dead of night. This is such a quiet and cozy and existentially comforting novel, and there's some beautiful moments in this novella. Oh my gosh. Let me try to read out one of the quotes to you that I have written down because I liked it so much. Nothing has a purpose. The world simply is. If you want to do things that are meaningful to others, fine. Good, so do I. But if I wanted to crawl into a cave and watch stalagmites with Frost Frog for the remainder of my days, that would also be fine and good. I think Frost Frog is like another robot. You keep asking why your work isn't enough, and I don't know how to answer that because it's enough to exist in the world and marvel at it. You don't need to justify that or earn it, you're allowed to just live. That's all most animals do. Isn't that one of the most comforting and reassuring things to hear from a book, from a robot? I think it is. Freaking love this book, 4.5 out of 5 for me. Alright, we got 2 more books, people. Hang in there. Next, in the horror genre, I read Security by Gina Wohlsdorf, and I typically do not read horror. I don't read thrillers, I don't read mysteries, because I'm a big baby and I can't deal with it. But Security is a slasher novel that because I'm the best decision maker in the world, started at like 8 p.m. one night, and I didn't stop until I finished it, so I finished it at like 1 or 2 a.m. and I couldn't fall asleep afterwards because it's a horror slasher novel. The book is about a killer on the loose in a fancy-ass bougie hotel where the hotel owner was so paranoid of kind of dying in the hotel because his father died in a hotel that he made this hotel, like, he gave it top state-of-the-art security. It's like maxed out on security, right? But the way that the novel is structured is super interesting because there's a bunch of cameras throughout the hotel, and at points the book is like separated into columns, so you see like camera 1 and it's like da 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 da, what does camera 1 see, and then camera 3, and then camera, I don't know, 54. So the way that it's structured was super interesting, and you can kind of see through these cameras how the killer moves throughout the hotel. I thought it was fascinating. Again, this is not my typical genre, so maybe that's why I was so entertained by everything that was happening. I thought the reveal of who the narrator was like so interesting. I was like, it blew my mind when I realized who the narrator was. I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. And aside from that, I know a lot of people didn't like this book because they didn't care for the characters that were being killed off. Didn't matter all that much to me because in my perspective, it's like everyone's gonna die anyways, so I don't really need to feel for them. I did like some of the characters' backstories that was presented. I thought they were compelling enough to make me like feel sad, just a little bit sad that they were dying, but not enough to be like devastated that they were killed, you know? Anyways, I thought it was a unique novel, probably because this isn't my typical genre, so I don't have much experience reading slashers. But I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Okay, and we've come to the last book. It's definitely last but not least because this was another 5-star read for me, and it was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a nonfiction. It's a collection of essays written by John Green about the Anthropocene, which is the era of human impact on Earth. Here's a better definition. The Anthropocene is the current geological age in which human activity has profoundly shaped the planet and its biodiversity. John Green writes with such a melancholic, nostalgic tinge. I listened to the audiobook for this, and the way that he read it is also, John Green reads the audiobook. His voice and the way that he reads his essays out loud, they're so good. A lot of the things that are mentioned in these essays were super interesting to me. You know, he writes about hot dogs, he writes about photographs and extinct animals, extinct birds. He writes about his experiences as a chaplain when he was younger. It's wonderful. And then all that tied back with the theme of humans' impact on Earth. I don't know, I just thought it was an amazing, amazing read. I liked it so much that I'm actually gonna gift physical signed copies of this book to a couple of my friends. I would never buy books for myself, or I rarely buy books for myself, but then when it comes to buying books as gifts for other people, I'm like, yes, yes, take it all. There's a healthy amount of despair in this book, but you know, on the flip side, there's also a healthy amount of hope, and yeah, just hope that humanity can turn things around and kind of wonder at the things that humanity has been able to achieve in the short amount of time that we've been around on the earth. So very insightful, arguably comforting at some parts. And yeah, my favorite essay is definitely the last one. It's I forget what exactly it's called, but it's the one about the photograph of the 3 or 4 men. My God. That essay was such a perfect way to end this collection of essays. If nonfiction is your thing, I would recommend getting your hands on this book. I don't typically read John Green. I'm not a huge fan of his YA novels, but I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised by this collection of essays. All right, we did it. We got through it. My voice is completely shot. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm gonna go grab a quick bite of something to eat and then go back to work. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you were able to find some good recommendations, and I had a great reading month. I'm really happy with all the books that I was able to read. Not a lot of misses, which I'm grateful for, and it's looking like November will be very similar. Read a lot of good books so far in November, and it's only been 2 weeks, so yeah. Okay, so have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye!